In the winter of 2023, a retired master sergeant named Emmett Rourke lay dying in a hospital bed in Tucson, Arizona. He was 89 years old, congestive heart failure. His daughter was holding his hand, his grandson was standing by the window, and for 65 years Emmett Rourke had said nothing. And then 3 days before he died, he started talking. And what he told his family in that room about a night in Nevada in 1958, about the people who go up and never come down. It frightened them badly enough that his daughter spent 8 months trying to find someone who could tell her whether her father had lost his mind. She found me. Why does a man carry something for 65 years and only put it down when his hands are too weak to hold anything else? My name is Frank Delgado. I spent 30 years in Air Force intelligence, and I retired a colonel. In 1958, I signed a paper before they would tell me what it covered. That's how it worked. You signed first, you learned second, and I kept the terms of that paper for 68 years. My wife died without ever hearing a single word of what I'm about to tell you. Everyone who signed those papers is gone now. Emmett Rourke was one of the last. So I'm going to tell it. I want to start not with the man, but with the moment. Because the moment is documented, and I have spent my life believing that documentation matters. The night in question was a Tuesday, March the 11th, 1958. Emmett Rourke was 24 years old, an airman assigned to a remote radar annex in the high desert of Nevada, north of Tonopah. The kind of installation that doesn't appear on the maps civilians see, middle of nowhere, 12 men on rotation, cold nights, empty roads, and a sky so black you could read by starlight. Here is my promise to you for the next 20-odd minutes. I am not going to embellish. I am not going to dramatize. I'm going to give you what Rourke told his family, what his daughter relayed to me, what matches the fragments I already knew from my own side of that paper. And where the record goes dark, I'm going to tell you plainly that it goes dark. I'm not making a claim. I'm asking a question. But the question once asked is very hard to put back down. Let me tell you exactly what Rourke said he saw, not the build-up, not the context, the moment itself. At approximately 0140 hours on March 11th, Rourke was relieved from his post at the perimeter of the annex. His walk back to the operations building took, on a normal night, about 9 minutes. Gravel road, one dogleg turn, no lights except the ones on the building itself. About 4 minutes into that walk, he said, the gravel stopped making noise under his boots. That's how he described it to his daughter, not that the sound faded, that it stopped. He said he could feel the crunch of each step through his legs, but the air had gone dead, the way it does inside a padded room. And when he looked up, there was a light sitting over the flat about 200 yards off the road, not moving, not hovering in the dramatic sense. Sitting. He said it looked less like a light in the sky and more like a hole where the sky had been. Rourke had been trained on aircraft recognition. He'd seen flares, he'd seen weather balloons, he'd watched test flights out of ranges we don't need to name. He told his daughter, and I'm quoting her recollection of his words, "I knew every machine we had in 1958. And I knew in 1 second this wasn't a machine we had." He should have run to operations. He didn't. He said his legs took him off the road toward it, and he remembers being calm about that, which disturbed him for the rest of his life. Calm was not the correct response. He knew that even at the time. At about 50 yards, he could see figures, 3 of them. Small, he estimated 4 feet, 4.5, thin limbs, oversized heads, skin he described as looking like candle wax that hadn't fully set, gray. And here's the first detail I want you to sit with, because it's the kind of thing that stays with me. He said they cast no shadows. The light source was behind and above them. Rourke's own shadow stretched out long across the desert floor in front of him. He remembered watching it move. Theirs didn't exist. The ground under them was evenly lit, as if the light passed through them or bent around them. That detail, that specific, almost clinical observation, is not the detail someone invents. It's the detail someone remembers. A liar gives you glowing eyes and dramatic music. A witness gives you the shadow that wasn't there and then apologizes because he knows how it sounds. And there was a fourth figure, taller, human height, human build, a man in civilian clothes, denim jacket, work boots, walking between two of the beings toward the light, not being dragged, not struggling, walking. Rourke said the man's pace was steady, almost relaxed, like a man walking to his own truck, and then the man stopped and turned and looked at Rourke across 50 yards of open desert. Rourke told his daughter the man's face was the worst part. Not because it was afraid, because it wasn't. He said the man looked at him the way you look at a house you used to live in. Recognition, a kind of farewell. And then the man turned back and kept walking, and the third being turned its head toward Rourke. Just the head, he said, the body never moved. And that is the last thing Emmett Rourke remembered about March 11th, 1958. One more thing. 2 days later, when a search team walked that flat looking for a missing local man, and we'll get to him, they found Rourke's boot prints leaving the road. They found only one set of prints out there. His. The man in the denim jacket, the three figures, the object itself, nothing. Not a scuff, not a burn. Rourke's prints walked 50 yards into the desert, stopped, and walked back. That detail just sits there. It does not close when you look at it directly. Here is what the available evidence, fragmentary, imperfect, but persistent, suggests happened after that moment. Rourke was relieved at 1:40. That's not memory, that's a duty log. And I have personal reasons to believe that log existed because logs from that annex crossed desks in my world later that year, 9-minute walk. He should have signed in at operations at roughly Oro 150. The operations sign-in sheet, again, per what Rourke told his family, and consistent with what I saw referenced in 1958, shows him arriving at 0455, 3 hours and 5 minutes, for a 9-minute walk. His wristwatch, a self-winding Bulova, and he kept that watch his whole life. His daughter has it in a drawer in Tucson right now. Had stopped at 147. It never ran again. He took it to 2 jewelers over the years. Both told him the movement was fine, nothing broken. It simply would not run now. Rourke's own memory of that gap, nothing. He remembered the being's head turning, and then he remembered standing at the operations door with his hand already on the handle, feeling his word, rinsed. Like something had been washed out of him, or through him. The math says 3 hours and 5 minutes are missing. Rourke believed, until the last week of his life, that whatever happened in those 3 hours was the reason he was left behind, and the man in the denim jacket was not. He believed he was shown something in that gap, and he believed it took him 65 years to be able to say it out loud. I want to be precise here. Missing time by itself proves nothing. Men fall asleep, men freeze up, men lose track. I've read the skeptical literature and a fair amount of it is reasonable, but men who fall asleep don't stop wristwatches, and men who freeze up don't get a sergeant hammering on the operations door at 0455 with frost in his hair and a core temperature. The medic noted it, Rourke said. The medic wrote it down. A core temperature slightly above normal. He'd been outside in the Nevada high desert in March for 3 hours, and he came back warm. That gap just sits there. It has sat there since 1958. It does not close. I want to be careful here, because the next part is where a story becomes an investigation, and investigations live or die on discipline. The man in the denim jacket, his name, and Rourke carried this name for 65 years like a stone in his pocket, was Dale Pruitt, 24 years old. Same age as Rourke, and Rourke never got over that symmetry. A ranch hand from Nye County, reported missing by his employer on March the 13th, 1958, 2 days after that night, last seen walking a road after his truck broke down. Dale Pruitt was never found. No body, no remains, no belongings. In 68 years, nothing. Now, one missing ranch hand in rural Nevada in 1958 proves nothing. Men walked into that desert and died of exposure. It happened. But the deeper Rourke's daughter and I went into the timeline, the more things started to cluster. And clusters, in any investigation, are the thing you cannot afford to ignore. Point 1. In the 18 months surrounding March 1958, there were 3 other missing persons cases within roughly 200 miles of that annex. All adults, all last seen at night, alone, on or near empty roads, all 3 never found. Not one recovered body among them. Anyone who has worked missing persons will tell you the desert usually gives people back eventually. A hunter finds bones, a flood cut exposes something, 4 for 4, nothing forever. That's a low probability outcome. Point 2, the vehicles. In 2 of those cases, the person's vehicle was found on the roadside. Engine off, keys in the ignition, doors closed, no sign of struggle, no footprints leading away farther than a few dozen yards. In one case, per the county record, the tracks simply stopped. The same way Rourke's own boot prints stopped, 50 yards off a gravel road. Point 3, the medic. The man who took Rourke's temperature that morning. Rourke gave his family the name, and I'm withholding it because he has living children who haven't chosen this. That medic was transferred off the annex within 11 days. His replacement arrived before his transfer orders were even fully cut. In the peacetime Air Force of 1958, personnel actions did not move at that speed, not unless someone wanted them to. Point 4, and this is the one I can speak to personally. In the late spring of 1958, a debriefing summary moved through the channels I worked in. I signed my paper before I read it. That was the arrangement, and I will tell you only this about it because it's the part that matters. It referenced an unrecovered civilian in connection with an observed boarding event in the Nevada sector. I read that phrase in 1958, and I have never once stopped hearing it because unrecovered is not the language of a search party that gave up. It's the language of an inventory. It's the word you use when you know exactly where something went and you know you're not getting it back. Each of these points alone, dismissible, a drifter, a coincidence, a fast transfer, a strange choice of words by a tired staff officer. Together, the pattern repeats with a precision that is difficult to attribute to coincidence. There's a difference between a silence and an absence. I want to explain that difference because I spent 30 years inside the machine that produces both. And I know how to tell them apart. An absence is when a record never existed or existed and was genuinely lost. Absences are ragged, sloppy. You find the folder but not the contents, the index card but not the file, a reference in one document to another document that's just gone. Absences have edges. A silence is clean. After I retired, and especially after my wife passed, I started pulling threads, quietly. Freedom of Information requests, filed as a private citizen. I knew the record systems. I knew the filing conventions of 1958. I knew what to ask for and what the boxes should have been labeled. The duty logs for that annex, March 1958, transferred to another custodian. Current custodian could not be determined. The station's incident summaries for the first quarter of 1958. Records of this type were retired and are not retrievable. The medic's transfer paperwork, they pointed me at the 1973 fire at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. And yes, that fire was real. It destroyed millions of files, and it has functioned ever since as the single most convenient hole in American record keeping. What they don't advertise is that whole categories of records had duplicates elsewhere. When I asked about the duplicate channel, the answer changed. It wasn't destroyed anymore. It was not responsive to your request. Read that phrase again. Not responsive. Meaning something is there. It exists. It simply will not be shown to you. That is not an absence, friends. That is a silence. And a silence is a decision. Somewhere at some point, a human being with authority looked at that material and decided it would not be seen. Polite, bureaucratic language is not neutral, not retrievable, could not be determined, not responsive. That is the sound a locked door makes when it's trying to sound like an empty room. And here's what 68 years of keeping my own signature taught me. The machine doesn't protect nonsense. Nobody builds a silence this clean and maintains it across 7 decades around a tired airman's hallucination. You don't classify a mirage, you classify a fact. At some point during those missing 3 hours, Emmett Rourke was made to understand something, and he spent 65 years attempting to translate it. This is the part that shocked his family. This is the part his daughter could barely repeat to me over the phone without her voice breaking. And this is the part you clicked on this video to hear. So I'm going to give it to you as carefully and as exactly as I can. Rourke said there were no words. He was emphatic about that. It wasn't language. It was his phrase, like being handed a fact you suddenly remember agreeing to. And the fact was this: most people who are taken are returned. The taking, for most, is brief. Hours, a night. They're examined or sampled or read, whatever word you want, and they're put back, and most of them never even know. Rourke understood that the returning was the norm, the rule. But some are kept. And the ones who are kept, the Dale Pruitts, the drivers whose cars are found idling on empty roads, the ones whose footprints stop, Rourke understood that they are not taken for parts, not for experiments, not for cruelty. He was insistent on this, and it did not comfort him. It was worse. He said they are kept the way a library keeps the original. Think about how a great archive works. Thousands of copies of a book circulate. They're read, handled, worn out, lost, and it doesn't matter, because somewhere in a climate-controlled room off the lending shelf, the first edition is preserved, complete, reference grade, the copy against which every other copy is checked. Rourke's understanding, and the fact he was handed, was that most of us are the circulating copies, sampled and returned. But every so often, they encounter a person who is, in some way we do not have the instruments to measure complete. A reference specimen, a voucher copy of a human life. And that person is not sampled. That person is retained. Retained. He used that exact word to his daughter in a Tucson hospital room 65 years after a staff summary I read in 1958 used the word unrecovered. 2 words, 2 men, 6.5 decades apart, both reaching for the same idea: not lost, not dead, held. I have turned that word over in my mind many times since his daughter said it to me: retained. His daughter asked him the question you're asking right now. She asked, alive? Daddy, are you saying those people are still alive? And Rourke gave her an answer I still don't fully understand, and I've stopped pretending I do. He said, and she wrote it down that night on the back of a hospital menu, and she photographed it and sent it to me. So this is close to verbatim. He said, a held note. Think about what a held note is in a piece of music. It doesn't progress. It doesn't resolve. It doesn't age into the next bar. It just continues, pure, unchanged, exactly what it was at the instant it was struck, for as long as the player decides to hold it. Rourke believed Dale Pruitt is a held note, that the man who turned and looked at him across 50 yards of Nevada desert in 1958, 24 years old, denim jacket, work boots, is, in whatever way that phrase can be true, still 24 years old, still exactly the man he was on March the 11th, 1958, preserved off the lending shelf. Checked perhaps from time to time against the rest of us to see how far the circulating copies have drifted from the original, and that calm on Pruitt's face, the look Rourke could never forget, the look of a man glancing back at a house he used to live in. Rourke went to his grave believing Pruitt understood what he was walking into, that at some point in those final steps Pruitt had been handed the same fact Rourke was handed, and had, this is the word Rourke used, consented. I'm not making a claim, I'm asking a question. But the question, once asked, is very hard to put back down. If it's true, if some fraction of the never found are not lost but kept, then what exactly are we the copies of? And who decided which of us was worth shelving? Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And Emmett Rourke is not unique. Here's a statistic almost no one talks about. In the United States, somewhere around 600,000 missing persons reports are filed in a typical year. The overwhelming majority resolve. People come home, people are found, cases closed, but every year a residue remains, the fraction of a percent that never resolves. No body, no trail, no answer. Over the decades, that residue accumulates into tens of thousands of open files. Most of those have ordinary tragic explanations we simply never learned. I want to say that clearly, most. But inside that residue, there is a sub-pattern. Adults, alone, at night, in remote places. Vehicles found intact, engines running or keys in the ignition. Tracks that walk a short distance from the road and stop. Search dogs that follow a scent to a point and then circle, confused, because the scent doesn't fade. It ends. Case files where the last page reads like the first page because nothing was ever added. I've spent the years since my wife died reading those files, and I've spent them doing something else too. Since Rourke's daughter found me, I've made myself quietly available to families like hers, families sitting with a dying father, a dying uncle, a dying grandmother, who suddenly, after 50, 60 years of silence, starts talking about lights and small gray figures and the ones who walked aboard. I have now heard some version of Rourke's account from 4 separate families, 4 deathbed testimonies, different states, different decades, witnesses who never met, never could have met, never read each other's stories because none of the stories were ever published. And in 3 of the 4, the dying witness independently reached for the same category of language. Not taken, not abducted, kept, held. One woman, a former nurse, and that's all I'll say about her for now, told her granddaughter that the ones who don't come back are the ones they keep true. The ones they keep true. The pattern repeats with a precision that is difficult to attribute to coincidence. Different mouths, different decades, one idea, that somewhere off the shelf, out of the flow of time as we experience it, there is a collection, and that the collection is of us, curated, maintained, consulted. Emmett Rourke died on a Friday morning in the winter of 2023 with his daughter holding his hand. She told me that in his last hour he was mostly quiet, peaceful even, but a few minutes before the end his eyes opened, fully, clearly, she said, more awake than he'd been in days. And he gripped her wrist with more strength than a dying man should have had. And he said, "You have to understand, they still come. They still come for the..." And that was the last complete thing Emmett Rourke ever said. His daughter has asked me, more than once, to finish that sentence for her. She thinks I know how it ends. She thinks a man who signed what I signed in 1958 must know the last word her father couldn't reach. And the honest answer is that I have a guess. I've had it since 1958. It's connected to what was in that summary, to the part I haven't told you yet, the part about how the ones who are kept get chosen, and how far in advance. The nurse's family sent me a box of her papers last month. I've read them twice now, and if what's in them means what I think it means, then the selections aren't random, they never were, and the next name on